Welcome to CS Week Success Stories, second Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern webinar series. These webinars are the top-rated workshops from our attendees for Conference 38 held last May in San Antonio. I am John Sild and I'm with CS Week. I'll be your moderator today, and Amber Weems will be your host. CS Week in Conference 39 will be April 27 through May 1st, 2015. At the Charlotte Convention Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. Registration is now live. This program will be recorded and available for playback, along with our other archived presentations. You can find it under the Educational Venues /webinars link on our website. Attendees are encouraged to upload questions in the Q&A panel on the lower right of your screen. Be sure to click the All tab to make sure that I see your questions. We will wait until the end of the presentation to answer all questions. Today's program, Revenue Recovery, the Water Loss Programs and Beyond, presented by Herb Firsching, Interim Director of Customer Operations at Gainesville Regional Utilities. Herb is the Director of Customer Operations at Gainesville Regional Utilities. He has a bachelor's in economics from the University of Florida and has held multiple positions during his 10 years. Herb started with GRU as a customer service rep and then spent a 7-year stretch in various analyst roles before settling into his current position. It is during those years as an analyst that he honed GRU's approach to water, wastewater accountability, and revenue. At this time, I want to welcome Herb and give it to you and take it away.
Thank you very much, John, for that introduction. I'm going to jump right in it because we've got a lot of slides here, and the overarching theme is accountability and do not assume. And so let me start here real quick, tell you a little bit about GRU. This is our agenda. We'll tell you about GRU. We'll tell you about this epiphany, this aha moment we had at GRU, which we called our Revenue Recovery Discovery Moment. I'm going to walk through some of the specific water wastewater strategies we identified, and then as I transition from water wastewater, some of the more holistic strategies we identified. And this is kind of the toolbox that GRU is using for revenue recovery that we're going to share with you today, this afternoon. Then we're going to wrap up with a couple of summary points. So getting right into it, GRU is a multi-service utility. We're located in North Central Florida, home of the Gators. We serve a little over 100,000 customers. We do electric, natural gas, water, wastewater, telecom, reclaimed water, and we also bill for the city's trash service and stormwater. We're currently on SAP for our customer information system. So simple concept, revenue recovery, right? It's about getting our income and recoveries and making sure we hold on to it. It's very critical in the utility business because we bill in arrears. So we put our services out there, and we hope that a customer comes back and pays us for those services. So even if you're not looking at delinquent customers, even if you're not looking at rate issues, even if you're not looking at water loss issues that may be costing you, just the act of the way we operate on a daily basis, it's a revenue recovery activity, right? We bill for the service, and then or we provide the service, and then 30 days later we bill for it, and we hope the customers pay for it. So we're constantly in this act of revenue recovery. Some examples, as I mentioned, the routine utility billing. Other issues are meter inaccuracy. If we have a meter that's not reporting correctly, we could be underbilling a customer. Leak detection is not so much on the revenue side, but obviously a contra expense. If we can save on the expenses, that helps us at the net bottom line. Theft, cross-connection, and the last one is technology. So sometimes we implement some systems, whether it's your CIS or meter reading systems, and policies may not apply with the system, or the system may not act the way former business practice used to be, and those end up resulting in potential revenue losses. And so hopefully you can recover those, and I'll share some examples here today of what we've done here at GRU. So a little bit of background on that epiphany, that aha moment we had. So we upgraded to SAP. We started the project in 2006. Part of that activity was to obviously data cleanse And one thing that I uncovered was we had an archived stop meter report. And I did a little digging, and I found out that our operational area hadn't run that report for approximately 10 years. And so I went to the operational area, and I asked questions, and it made sense why they had abandoned it 10 years ago. Basically, as I mentioned in the introduction, we have the University of Florida here. The way the stop meter report worked is if you had a water meter with 3 months consecutive zero use, it popped up on the report. Well, it's not uncommon here with the student population to have a vacant meter with all the apartments if they're gone for the summer months. And so at some point, the operational area just got tired of going to check vacant apartments and not find a whole lot of stop meters, so they abandoned the report. I ended up taking the report and working with a couple of our GIS analysts here, and we did a desktop analysis of places we thought maybe were more potentially likely to be stopped as opposed to vacant. And we recruited a couple of interns from the University of Florida, and we set them up to do a field check. We field checked 700 of those, and out of that 700, we identified 130 that were actually stopped, and that resulted in $120,000 of annual revenue we recovered. And that was kind of the beginning of what else is out there, or what else do we need to be looking at. Just to share a stop meter report process, and I think it's kind of unique here how we've partnered up with UF. This happened in 2006, almost 10 years later, we still have a group of 5 interns in the water wastewater department. They essentially run the report, they geocode it, they go out and do the field checks, so we're not spending sending a tech out there, and then based on their findings, they're coming back and providing a service order if indeed the meter stopped, and that's the only time the techs will go out in the field to do the repair. Subsequently, that for us results in back bills and also the ongoing forward annual revenue. So that's how we've managed the stop meter program. Huge impacts. Obviously, we get some of our money back, and we ensure proper billing going forward. The other interesting concept, and this is the conservation water resources point, customers have a unique way of using more service when they're not paying for it. So when you're thinking of terms of your unaccounted for water, or if you're working with a management district on your consumptive use permit, the more accurately you bill the customer, the more consciously they engage in the usage of that. So there's definitely managing your stop meter program is a good conservation water resource measure because it helps customers respond to paying for what they actually use. The other thing is the expense item. So the less they use, the less you're going to have treatment costs. So what we found is we could see a pushback from customers as they started getting those higher bills. They started to have to pay for, and also they pushed back for the back bill. The other thing is if you bill for wastewater, this is actually the bigger dollar. You're typically, if you're not billing for water, you're probably underbilling for your wastewater as well, unless you do a flat rate. In our case, we do bill in relation to our water use, and that we bill on average 2.5 times more for our wastewater service than our water. It was a huge revenue bump for the wastewater billing. So once we started digging into the stop meters, once we uncovered the stop meters, we started digging into other things. And GRU, and hopefully a lot of the listeners here are very proactive, customer-friendly. We want to, as often as we can, read meters accurately and bill customers accurately. What we weren't handling real well at the time was our estimated meters, and we unfortunately were getting customers who were maybe getting estimates for 6 or 7 months, and then unfortunately when we got an actual read, maybe they had a leak in the meantime, so the true-up was very high. And it was not uncommon for that customer to complain and GRU management to go ahead and concede on the customer's behalf and give a credit. So in a way, estimated meters shouldn't really cost you money, but it was for us because of the timeline we were allowing those to go for. So what we did is we started to shore up our estimate meter program. What we had is we made sure that if it was 3 months of consecutive estimate, that we definitely got someone out there to go ahead and either repair the issue, whether it was scratched glass or access to the meter, but we wanted to proactively you know, rather than sending letters to the customers to try to get them to chain up their dog or unlock the gate, that we were going to be as adamant and forceful as possible in a nice way to ensure we get that read after the 3rd month, and proactively shoot for meters 2 months out, because we really didn't want to get to the 3-month cycle. And thankfully, since my transition from there to the billing department, we have seen very seldomly estimates that run more than the 3 months. So we've done a good job maintaining this. And again, for us, it had a cost perspective because those customers push back on those bills when you don't get them an actual bill for several months in the running. So I'm going to start sharing some things that may not apply specifically at your utility, but perhaps it gives you food for thought. And one thing that I'll stress again here is a lot of things in GRU are unfortunately siloed, and people tend to assume other areas are taking responsibility for billing someone, back billing. So as we go through some of these examples, while they may not be practical or relevant to your utility, I would challenge you to think about what are the sorts of things we have here that cost us money or make us money that I assume other people do, but I've never verified, and take notes and ask those questions, because some of those things started to unravel as we started to ask those questions here. So some of these may be just really specific to GRU, but hopefully it gives you an idea of what sorts of things you might want to look at in your utility. So one specific one here is GRU. For our wastewater billing, we utilize what we call a winter maximum. The gist of it is, based on the customer's December and January water use, that is the cap we will bill them for wastewater for the rest of the year. So if they were to use 5,000 gallons in both those months, that is the maximum we will bill them for wastewater the rest of the year. If in a subsequent month they use only 3,000 gallons, we only bill to 3. If they use 10,000 gallons, we would only bill to that 5, and we assume the other 10 was for irrigation use or some outside external use. We have a system default when a customer moves in, so this is a little bit of that technology concern, that a residential customer with our average residential customer uses somewhere just under 6,000 gallons a month on average. So we had set the system default for a new customer who hasn't set their own winter maximum yet to have 6,000 gallons. Unfortunately, the way the rate is sliced, that applied to our multifamily apartments as well. So we could have, and we did have, unfortunately, apartment complexes in where we have a master 8-inch water meter that's serving 250 units, and for the first year, they could be using 500,000 or 600,000 gallons of water and only pay up to that 6,000 gallons of wastewater. So you could see that racked up big, and there were several significant back bills and adjustments at that time, well over that 120 I mentioned before, probably more like $250,000 when everything was settled as far as truing some of these wastewater billings up. Related to wastewater, we have kind of a unique setup that was established a long time ago between our building community and our utility, in that a new construction, when we set the water meter, because it's believed that water is used for construction purposes, that we're not going to bill wastewater until one of three events happen. One, a new customer moves in and takes ownership of the house, so obviously the wastewater is ready to go. Or if the water meter has been out there for 10 months, we will move in wastewater. Or if, because we have the benefit of hosting the electric service as well, if the electric goes temp to perm, we feel like that water meter has now pivoted from a construction meter to a domestic use meter, and it's appropriate to bill a wastewater. Our legacy system was very customized, and this decision point was automated. In our upgrade, in our implementation to our new system, this kind of got set to the side and was overlooked. I think a decision was made at any point several years later. We ended up finding out what we had, and this was kind of when the housing market was on the decline. What we were seeing is a lot of developer build and own apartment complexes come in, and so we had one large apartment complex that basically we never moved wastewater service in. So not only on the prior slide were we underbilling those that we had assigned wastewater to, in some instances we weren't even billing for the wastewater because we didn't move it in. At this point, This has been a long-standing process, a business process. We don't have automation in our CIS yet to handle it, but we have a department that's running some routine monitoring monthly, and they do the move-ins manually. The other benefit we have with a lot of services in the same house, we're able to compare one to the other. So we weren't, and recall at this time I was in the water wastewater division, so there was an assumption there that things were occurring in billing and customer service, that if a customer moved in water, well, they must have moved in wastewater too. Well, unfortunately, that actually wasn't happening, and we had a slight loophole on our web app that actually allowed a customer to deselect wastewater. So you take the average Florida Gator college student who's looking at a turn on, and he goes, well, I definitely need electric, hits the check there. I need to take water, I want a shower, hits the check there. Wastewater, because we use wastewater even though most people refer to it as sewer. College students thinking, well, I don't waste water, I'm not going to check this. And so we unfortunately had quite a few customers that were getting unbilled wastewater because we enabled them to not select that on the web app. Among other things, we had issues with CSRs not selecting them all as well. We've now eliminated a lot of those loopholes, but we are routinely checking. If you're a water customer and we expect to have wastewater service there, is it on? And if you're a wastewater customer and we expect to have water there, is it on? So that has been very helpful to kind of break those silos and leverage that information we have. One thing we've been looking at, and I think this speaks kind of back to the stop metered. So before a meter stops, it starts to crank down. And we did a lot of benchmarking on this, and a lot of folks out there, and maybe some of the listeners here have very proactive, progressive meter change-out programs where they're changing meters out every 10 or 12 years. GRU has had a change-out program. We've called it our 18-year change-out, and I believe the study was done about 20 years ago that found that in our system and with the meters we had standardized on, that was the optimum time to change out meters. What we ended up doing is we wanted to revisit that because we were getting a strong indication from the management district that we ought to be doing those, from the water management district, that we ought to be doing those much sooner. And so we started to test a lot of the meters we pull, and what we found out is meters weren't failing yet. So we started to look at, was there kind of a threshold? So if you have an apartment complex and you have a 2-inch meter there that's serving 20 units, if it starts to lose 10% of its accuracy, that could be a significant billing impact. If you have an office complex with an office with a 5/8-inch meter that feeds, it's one insurance agent and they use the toilet a few times a week, well, 10% usage there probably isn't, it costs you more to replace the meter than you might recover on that additional revenue for several years. So we started to look at more of a smarter change-out program. We're still dialing that in because we added some smart meters that have digital reads and data loggers, and we're starting to implement those in our system. So we really haven't ratcheted in how our change-out program is going to work. So right now we've still been stuck on the 18-year change-out as the end-all be-all, but what we've been proposing is possibly changing out some meters earlier, and other meters we may just let them run to failure and then change them when they're stopped, because that's the only point it makes sense. And possibly even at even when the meter hits a zero use, it may take several months to years before it makes sense to replace, but obviously you want to bill a customer, so we're going to do those. We got some grant money, and that's part of, we're still in the process of starting to implement some of those smart meters. So this is still a work in progress for us. When you're thinking about revenue, so this is, as I mentioned on one of the beginning slides, the other side of the equation is the expense. So as we started to shore up a lot of our billing and office and desktop activities to try to shore up some revenue, we started to look at other alternatives. So we implemented a fixed leak detection program. Basically, we deployed about 40 sensors in the downtown area of Gainesville, and they listen for 4 hours every night, and they turn yellow if they think there's a leak, red if they really think there's a leak. The interesting thing about this pilot was we put it in an area that we had a lot of leaks. And we thought for sure right away this would light up like a Christmas tree. And no sooner did we put these sensors in, we had no more leak calls. We had no more leak repairs. And so the pilot was kind of a dud because we were hoping to see how well they worked. We ended up hiring a leak consulting firm to come in, another company, to survey the area to see maybe these just weren't reporting. And when they surveyed the area, they didn't find any leaks either. So I joked that this is a leak prevention tool, not detection, because in the area we put it in, we never found leaks. Apparently with this vendor, the technology has changed, and we're looking at doing something a little different with them, but we still today have those out in the field, and occasionally we get a yellow blip. But for several years, they didn't light up at all. But it's one of the many ideas we've tried to look at. We also, when we talk to the operational areas about the things they're seeing out in the field, there was some reservation, one of that fixed leak detection. There was also reservation of when we had the guy out with the hydrophone listening for leaks. There was a strong belief that because of the soils in Florida and because of how shallow we placed the pipe, that if we had a leak, we're going to see it somewhere. Well, I think we all know that's not accurate. So we had, in order to kind of convince staff and bring them on board, at the same time we coordinated a leak survey pilot where we had a company come out and survey an area of town. They found several leaks, and this just happens to be a picture here of where we found the water coming out. A decent leak, I mean, worth repairing for sure, but you would have never seen it on the surface. So this is an interesting one that we covered. And if anyone on the phone has ideas, I'd certainly love to hear it after or shoot me an email. So fire lines, we don't meter, I'll say is extremely uncommon in our system to meter fire lines. Unfortunately, we probably have several fire lines that we are not even aware of in our GIS. And throughout this activity where we were really focused on shoring up our revenue, we ended up having two school campuses. They were unrelated to each other, but they were both tapped to fire lines. And one was discovered because in digging through some data, we happened to notice their consumption fall greatly. When we went back, we had a visit on a Saturday. We shut down various buildings, and we found out that they had constructed a new lab building on top of a fire line. They connected to the fire line, and there you go. So half the that lab building then looped to the campus, so the fire line was offsetting some of their domestic use. And then we had another campus. They were actually trying to do some testing of their own on site, and they could never get the water to turn off. So they called us out there to help with the meters, and when we advised the meters were off but the water was still running, we realized we had an issue. At the time, I did a lot of benchmarking, and we seemed to be all over the board as far as what the best way is to approach this. GRU, at the point we're trying to do is work on our standards for new construction. So let's make sure if we can meter the fire line, let's do that. If we have some in our system have existing detector checks, let's use those or set up some systems to do that. And then unfortunately, the last part of all that is all these inaccessible fire lines, all these legacy fire lines. How do we deal with that? And we have so many other, unfortunately, pressing priorities. We will probably wait till the next school campus or hospital or some other place that tells us they can't shut off water, and then we'll find out they were tapped onto the fire line. So it's an interesting one, but this is where we started to feel like we're looking for the needle in the haystack when it comes to our wastewater revenue recovery activities. So we have a pretty robust GIS solution in-house, and figuring on leveraging our water and wastewater, we did an analysis. If you had water service with us and you're 100 feet within a wastewater main but didn't have wastewater, we probably ought to think about why is that. Similarly, if you're a wastewater but within 100 feet of a water and not a water customer, why is that? And we ended up, so as you would expect, on the outskirts of our territory, you would see a lot of those because they might have water, they might have wastewater. But it was interesting, a couple have popped up right in the middle of town in well-known subdivisions that you would fully expect they would neither have a well or septic. And we went out and did a little dye testing, or our interns covertly turned the spigot on the outside of the house and ran a chlorine strip in there as a test to see if they might be on city water, and we did find several households within the urban district close to center of town where we'd expect that to be, but we never really explored the outskirts because that's kind of where we might expect that to happen. And again, this is a little bit more of the needle in the haystack. So getting to the needle in the haystack, it's curious. Somehow vendors, I don't know how they know if it's intuition or if it's blood in the water, but they know when you're working through something and they find you. And so while we were working this activity in-house, a third-party vendor approached us and proposed a very interesting concept, which was they would review all our billing data, they would work through property appraiser data and all their other proprietary information they have, they would do the field investigations and confirm that the issues they identified are indeed legitimate issues, and they would provide that feedback to us, and their pay is performance-based. So they only get a portion of your increase in revenue. Management, several years ago, we declined that because we were still working through a lot of those issues on the prior slides I walked you through, and so we felt like we had a lot of low-hanging fruit. We actually had apples on the ground we were still picking up, and we didn't want to pay someone a portion of things we were already well aware of. Several years later, we are actually now under contract for these services, and we submitted the data to them probably 4 or 5 months ago, and they've shot back a couple of questions to us, and we had a kickoff meeting about 2 weeks ago, and they're going to start doing the field investigations. So we'll see how well our prior efforts did or if there was any more opportunity for improvement. It was advisable for us to do this at this point because we felt like as we were sending out people to do all these dye tests, we were finding less and less of positive returns. And so if these guys, if this company is willing to do it, we thought it's worth the chance. So I'm pretty excited to see how that turns out for us. I expect some results, but I hope it's extremely limited to validate all the stuff we've done up until now. So this is where I'm going to transition a little bit from some of our tool chest of the water wastewater to the more general utility concepts we started looking at. Specifically, we were fortunate enough to, the University of Florida has a program called Integrated Product and Process Design, which basically they enlist engineering students, and companies come in and sponsor a team for a nominal fee, and you provide them either you want a prototype to be built or a problem you need to be solved. And so we met, and the problem we told them is as we were working through a lot of this billing data and cleaning things up, we didn't really have as much, we didn't have good reporting from the beginning. We also didn't have the ability, as we were starting to create these sort of reports we wanted to match up, we didn't really have the flexibility to create those or access to as much data as we wanted to. So we were proposed to them, could you come in and help us with the reporting? So they came in, as a picture of the first class of students we had here, and helped us out significantly. It's a 2-semester project, so we met, at some point we met for every other week, and then we met weekly as a ramp up, and they helped us implement a reporting tool that we now use to this day still. And conveniently enough, when they presented the tool to management, when the interns presented this to management, the manager in water wastewater said, hey, if any of these interns are available, I'd like them to continue development on the tool and help us continue to identify these opportunities and fix them. So thankfully, 2 of those students were available for internship. They were with us. Their internship started in late June. By August, we had converted them from low-dollar interns to much better paid permanent, we converted them initially to temporary full-time positions, much more better compensated for the effort they were doing, and that was because of these numbers right here. Their effort resulted in nearly $300,000 in annual revenue recovery. About 10% of that was in back bills, and their reporting tool helped save staff time and just gave us a lot more access to data that we didn't have prior to them. And wow, it's been a year and a half now. About a year and a half ago, we converted their 2 temporary positions to permanent positions. So I'm glad that we were able to, GRU was able to see value in these positions and permanentize them. So we'll always continue digging into the data and the reporting. This has been very beneficial, I think, as I walked through all those slides, and I talked about the no automation in our CIS. It has been through these 2 positions and working with our IT department that we're able to at least maintain and monitor and keep up. Although it's slightly time intensive, it's better than letting these go to the wayside again. Another thing they helped with, this is one of our existing accounts receivable reporting, and is very cumbersome for management to look at and pick out themes or make decisions or look at things that were going on. So it was one, and you may have these in your utility, it was one of quote unquote many reports we get that people get, they kind of look at and they file, but they never really analyze or think. And the term I was using is it's not actionable. So you look at this and you're not really sure what to make of it. We dug into this, and this is a small snapshot of the window, so it's not going to help you a whole lot, but we started to slice this out and said, well, what balances are we carrying that are due to active versus inactive? So if I'm looking at active balances that are greater than 180 days, well, how can I have an active customer that has a balance of 180 days? Are they exempt, meaning they're one of our government agencies that we have to approach the disconnection process differently? Or are they a standard customer and something got hung up that we didn't disconnect? So once we kind of opened this data and started looking at things a little bit deeper, we identified some revenue opportunities here. One of them, which was very unique, and I mentioned we had some active customers who had past due balances, for some of them greater than a year. So well, how can we do that and they're not getting disconnected? As we, oops, I think I skipped a slide here. I'll get to that one. So let me start with this one. This is one of those where business policy doesn't match up with your CIS system. So we implemented a policy in order to help customers with their deposit that if they enrolled for auto payment, bank draft, we would waive the deposit. So we implemented the policy. Our customer service rep practiced it in the field. But there was no thought to, well, how do we know if they cancel EFT? And what we found is we had several customers that today they roll an EFT, tomorrow they canceled it, and we never went back and got a deposit for them. I think this is where the assumptions come in. Customer service, we may have assumed the system was doing it, and obviously the system wasn't. And frankly, no one asked for the system to do it, and it doesn't make sense to. So it's one of those things that kind of just is a good idea. It implemented well from a policy perspective, but the practical parts of it were left. And so when we dug into this, we found we had about 86,000 customers who had signed up for EFT, promptly abandoned within a few months, and we sent them letters to the effect of, it's time to add a deposit to your account, and that was the 86K here. All right, this is what I meant to talk about. I apologize for flipping these slides. Back on that accounts receivable screen, we were looking at some current customers, and we noticed they had balances, in some cases, greater than a year. And what we identified was if you have an active customer that has a past due balance and it happens to be greater than 30 days and they enroll for our auto pay, the draft calculation doesn't sweep up anything greater than 30 days. So what we effectively had is we had a customer come in, they signed up for bank draft, thought they were paying current. Every month we were drafting the current amount out of their bill, but they had this one bill right before when they signed up that happened to be 31 or 32 days old, and it just kept getting older and older and older on our AR. And without us looking at those details in that that AR summary, we wouldn't have dug these up. So we cleaned up another about 7K here on these accounts. They were good customers. They meant to pay well. We just didn't have a process that helped them out or caught them up. It wasn't, there wasn't awareness that we need to follow through on these, and so now we monitor these as well. In digging all this data and hiring these two the two interns now, technical system analysts here, we've been helping shore up some of our collections. And so when we talk about our collections department at GRU, it's funny because it's one person, Luann. And so her position was created probably 4 or 5 years ago. Prior to that, collections was sort of owned in the customer service department, but with all the call center needs and everything else, it was it was a second thought. In creating the position with Luann in it, that was our first step to creating a legitimate collections department. She now has 2 interns, and now that we're giving her some data, we've been able to work through over $500,000 of customers that have active service with us, but at some point somewhere left us with prior indebtedness. So we're able to connect some dots. When I've gone up there, it's funny, I've seen one of the analysts who has a pushpin board on his wall, and it's like a CSI board, and he linked together 8 customers who happen to be family members that were rotating assignments on who is taking over the utility bill and then not paying. And between those 8, it was about $18,000 worth of utility bill service that they had owed us that we were able to pinch them. And, for that customer, it's not a great experience, but for every other rate-paying customer, it's pretty good that we're doing those things for them. And they actually set up a payment arrangement and have been paying their bills. So it's those sorts of things with exposure to data that we've had pretty good response on. Another item that GRU does with our additional deposit program, we didn't have a very systematic approach for additional deposits, so we had this in ordinance that we could apply additional deposit if a customer had unsatisfactory payment history. What we were doing is our approach was to ask a CSR when a customer calls and they're dealing with a disconnection, so we've just turned someone off for non-payment, and we look at their account, and as you're working through helping them restore service, if you happen to note they've had so many disconnections or bounced checks or poor pay history that it's time for an additional deposit, let's go ahead and add insult to injury and ask them for an additional deposit. At the same time, we're asking them to pay the past due balance and the disconnection fees. For us, and again, being very customer friendly, it's putting gas on the fire. And what we found is when you ask CSRs to do that, you get mixed results. There's some CSRs that are, like prison wardens, and they hold everyone accountable. There's other CSRs that cave, and they cave depending on how they feel that day or whatever's going on. So it's a real hard policy to keep consistent. And so what we did is we pulled that from the CSRs. We actually house that in collections now, and that's another monitoring report we've added to our system where we're running monthly who's eligible for an additional deposit. We send a notice to them. What we found is we've added a lot more deposits. We do get calls on them, and customer service reps are empowered that if there's certain situations to make an exception or possibly negotiate the auto pay, the EFT for the additional deposit. But thankfully now, we're tracking when they enroll for that EFT, and if they drop it the next day, we'll come back with this additional deposit. So we have a much more robust, consistent, systematic approach to additional deposits. Again, this was something that we just kind of took for granted, or we had a lot of gaps in how we were implementing this. This is a small one, but for those particular customers, it could be pretty huge. So a lot of times when you have a large commercial customer, at least we offer the option for surety bonds or irrevocable letters of credit in lieu of cash security deposits. We did at GRU an impeccable job of holding customers accountable when they start service to capture these items. What we didn't do is when they left service was ensure we were collecting on these. So we ended up we instituted some more reporting. It's another one of this portfolio of monitoring reports that Luann covers every month. And so she sees when a customer that's tagged with a surety bond closes service. She monitors if they have payment, and if not, we make claims on the bond or on the insurance company. And we've done, in the past 2 years, we've done a handful of those. Again, there's not a whole lot of these in our system, but we have made claims on a handful of those, and those are now money that prior to 2 years ago would have just gone, we wouldn't have collected because just assumptions. People assumed other people were doing it. Customer service assumed billing was doing it. Billing assumed collections was doing it. And thankfully we're not. So there's one other thing we've added to that list. This is sort of a side note. So we bill for stormwater. Again, this is a city service. A lot of times they annex. We ended up identifying through some work with the city that there were several properties we weren't billing on their behalf. We did some true up with their data, and we're fixing and have fixed nearly 2,000 accounts that were not being billed for stormwater. This is a unique one for us because we're the billing agent for the city and we're owned by the city, but we're not really the stormwater experts. So this is not necessarily internal utility assumptions, but we kind of assumed they were looking at the data and making sure we were billing correct on their behalf. And they assumed that we as their billing agent and knowing our CIS system, which their staff wasn't real familiar with, that we were validating it. So we've had a lot of meetings with them, and we're drafting an MOU so we can make sure everyone knows their roles and expectations. This is a little one, but this is another one. This is another one that people took for granted, and there were assumptions. So a lot of times you may have a side billing stream. It may be you may do some jobbing. Maybe there's a new development coming online, and there's a large tap that they're uncomfortable to do, or their contract doesn't have the right equipment to do, and they ask your utility to do it, and you bill for service. Or someone may have ran into your fire hydrant, and you're billing for the damages. What we had done in the past in GRU is we'd bill it, and then you just kind of assumed they paid. You never really followed up. And what we found is, unfortunately, a lot of these bills, they went to the customer. There was no automated process in our CIS at the time to kind of track whether things were paid or not. You just kind of either had to run a report or you had to manually check the accounts. We went back and created a dunning process for those, so now they get late letters. We also more routinely, we work in partnership with our legal department to pull those up to ensure proper payment. So that has helped. This is, again, just something that accounting, legal, customer service, billing, the operational areas, we all kind of assumed someone else was doing this. This slide here is just real brief. It's the tip of the iceberg. These are a lot of the things we've kind of cracked in and looked at, and it's all about breaking the assumptions, trying to identify who really does what, and defining those roles, those expectations, and the accountability, who's accountable for these things. We've been working on business intelligence. We purchased, to further use these, the technical system analysts that report to me, we purchased some software that'll help us access more data and put more things together. And a lot of the sort of manual intensive reporting they do, they'll be able to script actual reports where other staff, whether it be in billing and collections, can push buttons and run it faster. So we're kind of in the middle. We implemented, this was actually, the date is March of last year is where we implemented, so we're well a year into implementation. We've added a lot more data to the database, and now we're starting to build more reporting on it, specific reporting tailored to a lot of these opportunities I've identified. So we hope at some point that tip of the iceberg, with all that access to data, we'll be able to see how much of that iceberg is underneath, because I think there's a lot more for us to uncover and piece together. And it seems like it's slowed down a little bit because I've been distracted with other things like getting some presentations ready, but it used to be a very not uncommon occurrence for staff to come in my office and tell me, hey, did you know this does this? And then we dug into the, oh man, I can't believe this is happening. Who's supposed to do this? Thankfully, that seems to be a monthly event rather than weekly, so it seems like we may be uncovering the bottom of this iceberg here at GRU. In summary, I think the takeaways are you need to have, look across the spectrum of your utility, verify assumptions about responsibilities. I'll share a unique experience I had at a conference a couple years ago. I was talking to a fellow who was in the county and he billed for wastewater, but the city billed for water, and then they sent the meter readings to him to bill for wastewater. And what he shared with me after we had a conversation that wasn't apparent to him is he said, man, I've got to really ask the city about their stop meter program, because I wasn't aware they could be hurting my revenue if they have a really lax stop meter program. So it's those sorts of things. You don't want to assume people are doing things, whether it's in your utility or people you rely on. You want to ask those questions, verify people are doing what you expect them to do, document it. In terms of what worked well for here at GRU, myself and the group that reports to me, we weren't officially dubbed the revenue recovery roles, but that kind of happened organically, and it was very helpful. So whenever things occur in the utility, they tend to come across my desk or my staff's desk, and we're documenting all these. We're creating on-the-fly reporting, and they're running it if they have to, or we're trying to create more routine monitoring and reporting that staff can just press buttons and do these, and just ensure every now and then we're going back to say, hey, if we've assigned, for instance, the stop meter report to the operational area, let's check every 6 months or year and see the current status on that. We were able to do a lot of this with little resource. I mean, the biggest resource we had was that purchase for the robust reporting tool we bought, basically a very large database. But we were able to make a lot of these cases, taking the interns, which was unheard of at GRU, I think, at the time, to take 2 interns, convert them to temporary professionals, take them from temporary professional, and convert them into full-time professional in light of declining revenues, in light of rate pressure demands. But because the return on investment case was, you couldn't argue. I mean, these 2 folks were, when they're helping us recover $500,000, you just can't argue with that. So I would definitely suggest you do some pilots, figure out what little dollars you can save, and make cases for the bigger dollars. It's simple and complex. It's as complicated as the fire lines. How do you address those? Or is it simple in terms of revenue recovery? It's as simple as you bill a customer and you hope within 30 days they're going to pay you before you send that next bill. So unless we change how we bill and we become more like the cable companies, for us, revenue recovery is never ending because we're always billing in arrears and we're always chasing that dollar. With that, I covered a lot. Now it's time for any questions you have.
All right, well done, Herb. We do have a number of questions, so I'm going to start with this first one. What percentage of your meters are stop or fail in a year?
That's a great question. I'm going to say we do percentage of whole meters, so I think we average about 50 stop meters a month. I'm going to have to grab a calculator real quick here. We have about 60,000. Well less than, I mean, it's very small. We average about, so when we run our stop meter report, we're probably identifying 50 to 75 a month to repair out of 60,000 some odd meters out in the system. So a very small portion are coming up as stop meters.
Gotcha.
I mean, it's less than 1% of a percent.
Gotcha. Very good. All right, next question. What is the reason for using just 2 months for the sewer base calculation versus several more months?
Okay, so it's part of it, and I know we hate this answer in the utility, is it's how we've always done things. But it's how we've done it for a very long time. There's actually some thought behind it, though, in that we assume during December and January our irrigation customers are less likely to irrigate because it's just the cooler times of the year. You're not going to put water on the lawn. So the uninformed customer who is unaware how we do winter max is still likely to water less and use less water, thereby setting a more legitimate winter max for the rest of the year. The thought of the winter max is what are you legitimately using for internal use versus external. And so if you had a new customer come to the system and they don't know winter max, the thought is in December and January they still should have relatively lower water use than they would the rest of the year. So that's why we stuck at those 2 months.
Okay, very good. Our next question was one, they were asking if we were going to be recording and will this be available for playback, and yes, that is. We'll have that up online within a few hours later today. So for those of you that are wanting to go back across and listen again to this wonderful presentation, it will be online later today. Our next question is, how far back can GRU backbill? And then how far back can they go after bad debts? For instance, the family members that rotated the bills in their name.
Good question. So technically we could backbill as long as we wanted to because we're a municipality. What we do, though, is we do follow the recommendation of the Florida Public Service Commission, which is a 12-month backbill. So that's what we do is we backbill 12 months. On the customer's benefit, if it's an error on their behalf, we'll go back 3 years on the credit. When it comes to the prior indebtedness, as long as you're on my system, I'm always going to collect it, and my legal has supported me in that. I know our accounting at some point, they do an activity to write it off, but they're writing it off within 6 months to a year. But we've had customers that come back 6, 7, 8 years later, and we're asking them to make accommodations to pay that balance.
Okay, very good. Next question, in regards to waiving deposits with EFTs, how are you maintaining and monitoring it now?
So one of my 2 analysts there, she's running a transaction every month that can see when we have a new EFT account created. We also have some documentation there as far as whether it was a new account or an additional deposit account. And so she's tracking EFT created and how long did it take. And so what we do is we hold deposits for 2 years. So our intent for the EFT is if you stay on EFT for 2 years and then after 2 years you abandon it, we'll treat it like a deposit that we would have refunded. And by default, if you're on EFT for 2 years, you have impeccable pay history. So we'd refund a deposit even if you had it. So she's just using a methodology that says who signed up, who dropped EFT in this, sorry, I said it the wrong way. She's actually looking backwards. Who dropped EFT this month? How long ago did they sign up? And what were the circumstances they signed up? Because obviously we have customers that may have been with us 10 years, they sign up for EFT and they just decide later they don't want to be. And so she's looking if there was a start service or an additional deposit event. And then she sends that report to the billing department. Because they have to pop into every account to add the additional deposit, they're just doing a quick glance to make sure it's appropriate, and it's probably 99% accurate that it makes sense to add that deposit.
Okay. Next question. Do you have any trash-only accounts? And if so, how do you keep up with the occupants?
Oh, man, that is a good question. I believe we do have some trash-only accounts. No, actually, I don't believe we have trash-only accounts. So we only handle if they are trash can customers. So typically that's going to be associated with a tenant. I mean, it may be an extreme exception that somewhere a landlord said, I want to pay for the trash as opposed to the tenant. So now you got me thinking. There's another thing I got to dig into. So thank you for whoever asked that question. I think normally, but this is an assumption, and I said you shouldn't do these. I think normally it's associated with a tenant account, but I'm making a note here. I'm going to have to find that out. So thank you for that one.
All right. Next question. On your water meters, do you presently read by visual or radio read?
Presently by visual. We have a small portion of the ERTs, which are like the radio reads, but unfortunately for a lot of those, the technology and the meter, when it's under dirt and it's wet, you have to get almost on top of the meter. So a lot of times it's not working. We've now standardized on these smart meters that are AMI ready, and we are starting to build. There's a pilot through our electric division to build the infrastructure for an AMI network. And so they're going to start deploying some AMI, but holistically across the system, we're pretty much a visual read on the meters.
Okay. When you change out water meters, do you follow up by testing the meters removed and maintaining a database to monitor your recoveries?
No, I wish we did. So when we started to explore that change out through that pilot, we contracted with someone. We had a significant relocation of a lot of our utility moved. We built a new operational center, and when that occurred, damage happened to our testing bench, and I've been outside the water division for 2 years, but at the time I left, we hadn't repaired the bench yet, so we actually didn't have on-site testing. We did have some mobility tests available, some that were attached to the back of the truck. I don't think those are technically certified, but they did enough for us to really suggest if a customer was having issues with their meters. And when we started talking about testing every meter we pulled, the costs didn't seem like something we want to entertain. We may come back, and during the pilot we hand selected some and tested various ages to see the accuracy, but we don't test every meter we pull.
Okay. We have a question now saying, can you tell us a little bit more about your smart meter implementation?
Yes. So we ended up with the whole no lead brass water meter initiative. We had to identify a new standard meter to go with. So we've went with one that what it currently does, it has instead of your old kind of odometer read, it has a digital read. It has a wider flow range with greater accuracy. So it's caused us an issue. We're actually working through this now. It caused us an issue with how we do our connection charges, or what some people call capacity charges, because what we're using is we're now using a 3/4 inch meter in terms of the flow range that this provides, but we're telling customers and charging them as a 5/8 inch meter. So that's a side issue we're having to work through. What the smart meter does is it has a data logger in it that records flow. I believe it's by the quarter hour, and it stores 40 days worth of data, and we have what we call affectionately the hockey puck. It's a circular thing you kind of plug on the top, and you can manually go and pull the data. It also has the outputs where you can start adding, it's an additional cost of like $70 to add the wiring to make it AMI or AMR ready, and so at that point we'll go there. So that's what we have now. It's a digital read with 40 days worth of data. We have to go out in the field to pull the data off of it if we're in a bill dispute. We've standardized on that, so as we do stop meters, we don't have a proactive plan to change all the meters out. Just as we pull meters, specifically the residential 5/8 inch meters, they're being set with these new smart meters.
Okay. Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I'm going to have to just kind of limit our questions. I'm going to take this next question. How long did it take you to complete the analysis of 700 meter replacements?
That was the summer. So we had interns. They probably started by May time frame, and by August, that was the completed list. Unfortunately, they did that work. We fixed all those meters. We turned over the stop meter report to the operational area. They had staffing issues they didn't communicate, and so next summer they came back and said, can you get those interns to work on this again? And so that's when we decided to keep the stop meter, the front end of the stop meter reporting, and the interns are managed in our engineering group to keep that there. So that's been there ever since.
Okay, well, very well. All right, we are right on top of the hour, and so I'm going to go ahead and just be mindful of everyone's time and our attendees, and we're going to go ahead and close today's session. I do want to make mention that Herb has done a fantastic job on this webinar, and I want to let you know that he will be, again, speaking at CS Week in a few weeks. We're about 7 weeks out, so he'll be speaking, and his title this year will be The Evolving IVR Value Proposition, and he's going to be on Thursday of our conference. So look him up, and he will be there to speak, and I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing him again. If we have questions that have not been answered, we will get those to Herb, and then we can get you an answer in a timely manner. At this time, we want to thank each and every one for being on this call, and we thank you for being a part of our webinar. This concludes our webinar today. Have a good day.